Welcome to the Post Shift Podcast, your raw look at the hospitality industry, brought to you by SHC. What is happening, Post Shifters? Welcome back to another episode of the Post Shift Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Shawn Soole. As you've been noticing, I have been live streaming like an absolute beast this last couple of weeks. I'm just trying to get ahead of summer, and I'm just lucky enough that I've been getting some really fantastic guests, and today's guest is absolutely fantastic. It's, of course, our cocktail historian. I say our cocktail historian as a commutative industry. He has helped guide our history of cocktails over the last 20, 25 years, or as long as I've been doing this in the industry. So David Wondrich is a cocktail historian based out of New York, and he is going to be talking to us about modern cocktail culture. Welcome. Good morning, David. How are you?
Hey, Shawn. How are you? Good to see you.
It's good to see you, sir. It has been a little bit long. I think I crossed paths at Tales last year, but Tales is always such a massive gong show of like
I
passing
never
in
remember
hotel
who
lobbies.
I see at Tales.
yeah, it's not good. So for everybody listening, if people have been living under a rock, give a quick little spiel on elevator pitch on how you got into the industry and how you got to the position you're in now.
Well, it was completely accidental. I had to invent my own job, and those are always the most fun jobs. At least they can be, or you could be doing something really dumb for no money. But I was an English professor, and I was writing about music on the side. I liked writing about music, although it didn't pay anything. I hated being an English professor, and that didn't pay anything either. And a friend asked if I could write something on cocktails. He knew I liked cocktails, and I had a couple old cocktail books in my house that he'd seen. And I said, sure, because it was for Esquire magazine's website. This was at the very end of 1999. And, Esquire magazine, I always admired and thought was a cool magazine. So I was like, yeah, let me give this a try. And that ended up being, I ended up being the contributing editor there for 17 years writing about cocktails. So I always say I started at the top of the business and I've been working my way down ever since.
So with spending decades digging into the cocktails and the roots of cocktails, when did you realize it was more of a curiosity and actually like a cultural lens worth preserving and like documenting?
Well, it started pretty early on. I was bloviating, as happens at a bar, to some people who belonged to Slow Food USA or Slow Food New York, that organization based on or dedicated to preserving foodways, cultural, ways of dealing with food, and basically the old ways. And I said to them, this was in like 2002. So early on, I was new to the business, but I said, hey, old-fashioned bartending is one of those foodways, and we should do something. And they said, like what? And I said, well, why don't we do a tribute to Jerry Thomas? Who's that? Well, he was the guy who wrote the first Bartender's Guide, and he lived in New York and had bars in New York, and he never got a tribute. And they said, all right. And so next thing I knew, I was involved in planning this thing. And to do that, I had to write a little booklet on Jerry Thomas and research his biography. And I realized it hadn't really been researched correctly or much at all. And there was a lot of stuff out there that nobody had ever dug up or, hauled out into the light. And I thought, okay, let me give it a try and see if I could do more of this. So I turned that little like one-page bio into a book, which did quite well. People were interested, it turned out. And so I've been doing that ever since.
Wow. Yeah, it is crazy because I try and, as we have the younger generation coming up in the ranks, trying to explain to them just the difficultness of it was to get information circa like that 2000 to 2007, 2008. Like there wasn't massive online communities as Chanticleer and a few other ones, but like there was nothing like there is today. And then you could talk about like, oh, you got books. Like I got 500 books here. I got 500 books back in Australia that will never leave. Will never leave Australia because this is just going to cost me too much. But like every time I walk past a bookstore, I'd go into a bookstore looking for anything that I could find to like completely like learn more because there was no internet. And trying to explain that to the younger generation is not the easiest thing in the world.
No, they grew up in, this stuff was all there in abundance. And that was great for them. But on the other hand, it meant that they also didn't have as many opportunities to carve out space for themselves as we did. Because when 20, 25 years ago, if you found some like rare information, you could wave it around and everybody would go, hey, what the hell is that? Look, this guy found something really cool. And all the stuff that was just lying there, waiting to be found easily, has all been found.
Yeah.
Now it's more like digging very deep, and you have to be like an archaeologist with a brush and a trowel and carefully unearth things. Then you could just walk around and pick it up and stick it in your bag and walk off with it.
Well, with that being said, now with all the access we have now, digitized newspapers, like AI, how has that process changed for you for researching cocktail history since you first started?
Well, AI not useful for me. I'm not. It doesn't. I need stuff that I can count on and put in somewhere where somebody will say, "Hey, that's wrong." I don't want that. I want to get it as right as possible. But I see a lot of other people using AI, especially if they're just casually researching stuff for like a cocktail menu or something, and you run into trouble that way. But there are a lot more databases available now, but on the other hand, there are a lot more people researching too, and a lot more people who know how to use them. When I started with this stuff, I wouldn't say I was alone, but I was one of the very few who was using this stuff for cocktail things. And so that was very different times. Now you've got to really come up with a whole narrative. You can't just say, hey, look at this interesting stuff I found. Let's talk about it. Now everything's got to be nailed down,
I remember the story when you bought a random history book online and it arrived and you were eating breakfast and you found the first mention of the aviation. And you almost dropped the vintage book. You just spent a couple of $100 into your cereal.
Yeah, that was wild. I found the aviation with creme de violette in it, and I'm like, what? I'd seen a recipe like that, but I thought it was just some crazy outlier, and in fact, that was the recipe. So, and then I found out that book was half the book. Almost every drink from that book was in the Savoy cocktail book. Had been stolen by Harry Craddock, and I'm like, okay, this book is actually useful, important, and it's interesting that Craddock left out the creme de violette. So
Craddock did that a lot. So that being said, like you were talking about AI and menus and so on and so forth, what is that one myth or popular story that's in the cocktail world still to this day that refuses to die, and no matter how many times you disprove it, it just keeps coming back up, whether it's the Manhattan and Churchill's mum or...
Yeah, I mean, that's one of them. You can't get rid of it. The Martini and Martinez in California. As far as I know, there's actually no connection, but what can you do? The idea that the Martinez is a different drink from the Martini, it's all the same drink. It was just there was no drink media then to write down the drinks so you could see how they were spelled, and everybody said everything differently. So if somebody asked for 2 Martines, somebody else is going to write that Martinez. I have these Martins cocktails or Martinez or whatever. So there's that. Oh man, the margarita is surrounded with myths about who invented it and where. And the problem is all this, we don't really have pedigrees or birth certificates for these cocktails. It's very rare where it's so documented that you got to say, all right, yes. So you've got to, even in the absence of that, that always leaves room for people to say, well, I don't like that story. This one sounds better to me. And I'm just going to use that, even though it's highly improbable.
Yeah, it's always interesting because I find it funny how people sort of argue these points about where the names came from, that sort of stuff. And I remember even back when I was younger, a pub opened and they literally just took my whole menu from one of my cocktail bars,
Yeah.
changed all the names, and like that was their cocktail menu. They'd come in. I remember the managers coming in for a few drinks, and they just basically took my whole menu, reverse engineered the recipes, changed
Yep.
the names, and that was their cocktail menu. And I'm like, that's exactly what would have happened. It doesn't matter if it was 20 years ago or 110 years ago.
Exactly,
It's the same thing.
Exactly. You know, you tell some bartender, we need to get some new drinks in here, and they're like, what the hell? You know? I don't know. I don't have any new drinks. I'm just a bartender. I make people what they want, but I better go steal some.
How do you think the average bartender's relationship with cocktail history has evolved since you brought out Imbibe all those years ago? Are they still curious? Are you finding they're still curious now, or you feel like they've just got so much information that they're just trying to pull through all that information?
I think it's a little of both. The general run, that history moment seems to have passed, and a lot of people are saying, screw it, we're just making espresso martinis and Aperol spritzes, or if they're very hip, Hugo spritzes. And that's just what people want. And porn star martini, there we go, that's our list. And there's plenty of that. But there are people still, I still meet lots of people who are into the history and kind of catch fire about that aspect of things, who enjoy being part of a long tradition and having, like, standing at the head of a long line of bartenders who carefully passed down their traditions and drinks and information and how to use the tools and even the jokes to tell the customers and all that stuff. So there's still enough bartenders like that. Unfortunately, the industry has moved away from that kind of education. 10 years ago, there was bar smarts everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
There was World Class did much more with education than it does now. There were independent things. I used to do with Simon Ford these bartender history walking tours. They were just huge amounts of fun and very boozy, but also very educational, because we'd go to the places where all the old bars used to be and talk about what went on there and who the bartender was and what the drinks were. And now it might be a parking lot or a laundromat, or hey, even occasionally that same bar. You never know. But that was cool, and there was a lot more of that kind of education, but the industry has pulled back on that.
Why do you think that? Why do you think so?
It's expensive. I think also pandemic kind of broke a lot of people, and it broke the industry of the in-person habit. Now they'd rather do it on Zoom, and you can't do that kind of walking tour on Zoom. It's a watching experience and not a holy shit, this is crazy, the cops are going to get us for drinking in this park.
Yeah.
we better slam down our improved whiskey cocktails a la Jerry Thomas that have just been served to us in little paper cups in the middle of the park across the street from where his bar was, and we better get out of here. So that kind of stuff is what you remember. You don't remember a presentation.
No, I do agree with you. Like, for me, Bar Smarts online is like my benchmark. Every single staff member I have starts with the thing, just so it's a nice foundation for everything. So Bar Smarts online is like every single staff member does Bar Smarts online, so that that's their foundation to build everything else up at.
It still works, but until pandemic, we were going around to 4 cities a year and testing people live. And giving them like live experience with tasting and getting to see Dale make cocktails, and your judge might be Dale, or it might be Jim Meehan, it might be Julie Reiner. Your judges, it might be me, God help you. So that really put people on the spot and made them focus. You know?
Yeah. Let's talk about the Oxford Guide briefly, because
Yeah, yeah.
I helped do a few things in that, and
Yes, you did.
that was a massive project. Obviously, the final product, I don't think a lot of people understand. The final product, while it is a huge tome of awesomeness, the amount of legwork it took years before. Because I think I got emails once every like 18 months, 2 years, and you're like, oh,
That's
going
about
through another,
right.
yeah, another set of edits. Like it was like a 6 or 7 year process. Like another set of edits. Can you change this up? Can you fix this? Can you do some more words on this? Can you go research on this a little bit harder? Um, how did that sort of come about? Because like I do agree with you. Like it's now the industry is becoming more mature in a way that there's people out there that aren't necessarily in the hospitality industry that are like, I'm very interested in this. Can
Right.
we do something that's this extensive, which was the Oxford Guide? How did it sort of come about? And did you get pitched, or did you pitch them and then build it out from that?
I got pitched my old and good friend Garrett Oliver, who's the famous master brewer at Brooklyn Brewery and a man of infinite energy.
It really
I
is.
watched him put together the Oxford Companion to Beer, and that was a brutal process. And then when that was finished, he turns around and says, "Can you do the spirits and cocktails one? My publishers want to know. They asked me who I could recommend, and you were the only person I could think of. So would be foolish enough to do it." He didn't add that part, but he was thinking it. And I eventually got talked into it. And oh boy, I'm not the person to be organizing large projects. So after about a year and a half, I got Noah Rothbaum, who's much more organized than me, on board to help with the organization and herding the cats and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. But it was a huge, ultimately the whole process took 9 years. Most of that time wasn't spent working very much on it because stuff needed time to develop. We sent out requests for people to write things and then we waited. But I also had to write some 250 entries, which is a lot.
Wow.
And I learned so much working on that book. The whole idea behind it was, you look at the internet and you try to research some cocktail thing on the internet, and it's always the same information getting
Hmm.
recycled between like the five sites that write the most about this kind of stuff. And our idea was, let's get new information into the system. Let's use some of these new databases and things like that, and better awareness of what are the useful books and all that. And let's find new useful information and stick it in there. So I researched like biographies of at least 100 bartenders, and to find out when they were born and when they died. We never had that information. Even something as simple as that, like what year was this person
Hmm.
born? What year did they die? Where? you know, just stuff like that, basic information. And so we tried to supply that, and also a lot of new information on things like the history of rum, which had not
Hmm.
been understood properly. And a lot of histories like that, people had seen one piece of it or another, and they hadn't stood back and pieced it all together. And this was an opportunity to do that. So it was a huge job. Amazing, I finished it.
How many people did you have involved, like total by the end of it all?
We had 165 contributors around there,
Wow.
and many of them were just one or two entries. But we tried to get the right person for those entries,
Hmm.
and then some people did a lot, and then I did 250, which is a real lot. And then we had editors and photographer Eric Metzger, the great drinks photographer, shot the original photos that we used. Of like bar gear. There'd been no history of bar gear before this.
Hmm.
Stuff like that. Just really basic shit that just had not been covered. What's the history of liquor bottles? What's
Hmm.
the history of closures? Like, was it always corks? What was it? What?
I think my favorite story out of it was the backstory and the real history of Benedictine.
Oh yeah.
Just that one, because again, it's one of those stories that you get told when you're a young bartender, and you'll just
Yeah,
regurgitate
yeah,
it
yeah,
forever
yeah.
and ever and ever, like Duo Opto Maximo, like those sort of things. And then you read that, and you're just like, damn, the last 28 years of my life has been a fraud.
Yeah, there was that one. Another one was Grand Marnier. We found the actual history of Grand Marnier. There was a restaurant in London asked the Marnier company to use their, instead of blending their Curacao concentrate with neutral spirit, they asked them to use old cognac from their cellars. And Marnier thought, hey, you know, this stuff tastes good. Maybe we'll market our version of this. We'll sell this to these guys, but we'll do our own version. And that got us Grand Marnier. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff like that that's very interesting.
Now
That just,
people listening are going, damn, I gotta go get that book now and figure out, like, read all this way through. I just have a friend in Toronto who actually finished it front to back.
oh,
He
good
read
for
the
them.
whole entire thing. H in Toronto. Give a shout out to H. He never listens to my podcast anyway, but he actually just posted that he read it from front to back.
Good for him. I hope he enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful
Yeah.
and fun. Uh, you know, we tried to uh, make the entries at least a little bit amusing on occasion. Uh, we tried to get away with that.
So you've written about all these books and reflections of the time and all this history as we were just talking about. What's
Yeah.
today's cocktails say about us and where the culture is at right now?
Well, it's kind of I think we're catching it at a weird moment. Coming out of pandemic, everything was first like real basic, and then it immediately flipped into being, how can I make the most complicated cocktail I could possibly make with as many homemade ingredients and rare imports, you know? And that's been going pretty strong. I mean, for a long time, but it came extra strong over the last couple of years. But now, only this year, I'm starting to see some reaction to that, where people are saying, okay, enough, you know, I don't need like pandan chamomile infused vermouth in my martini, because that's just too much. I just want a martini. I just want, you know, I just want a sidecar. I just want, you know, like a basic cocktail, not like a dumb cocktail, but just a fairly straightforward one, something that I can predict what it's going to taste like and know that it'll be worth the outrageous amount of money I'm spending on it.
Oh, and that's the thing, is sometimes I find bartenders, they go on this massive, like, sort of arc to find
Yeah,
a flavor profile. And just as an example, like one of my bartenders, he was doing like a black currant infused vermouth, da 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 da, and I
yeah,
tasted it, and he's like, we can't replicate. It's coming out really muddy. And I taste, I'm like, this is cassis. Why
yeah,
don't you use cassis and then infuse the cassis with more red currants if you want to like
yeah,
dry
yeah,
it out a little bit? And they're like, oh, okay, we'll do that. And then we were like juicing honeydew melons for a foam. And I'm like, why aren't we just using Midori?
yeah,
Just get
yeah.
Midori, water it down a little bit so you get the sweetness down a little bit, and then make the foam out of that. And they did that. And they're like, it's perfect. I'm like, sometimes we
See,
go on this massive arc instead of just
yes,
going the straight route.
yeah. I think I mean a lot of that comes with being older or older in the business. Let's say more experienced in the business. Uh, and knowing your ingredients that well,
Mhm.
you know, so you could say, oh, I want this flavor. Well, I know exactly what tastes like that, you know, and I'll just go reach for that. You know, I want it like chartreuse, but maybe a little brighter herbal, like yellow chartreuse, but brighter herbal. Strega.
Strago.
There we go. You know, done, and easy, and fun, and so yeah, I think that's part of it too. Is just experience
Mhm.
and spending your time with the ingredients and learning what each thing is good for and what to reach for.
Do you find that that's the balance we need to sort of get back to between creativity and authenticity, because of that sort of Instagram, social media life we live in right now, where we need to get back to this sort of like, what is your authentic take on this cocktail, and how do you make it balanced?
You know, I don't want to say don't be creative because that would be dumb, right? Of course, you can be creative and you should be creative, but you have to also sort of realize that you're working a craft as much as it is an art, and probably more. And craft is all about making things that people can use. You know, you're making these drinks for people to drink and enjoy, and not to sit there going, whoa, what was that? That is so weird. I'll have one more sip, you know. Do you want another one? Oh, God, no. One was enough. Thank you very much. That was very interesting. You know, I kind of like drinks that are moreish, that you go, yeah, that was good. I want the second one just because the first one went down so nicely.
Hmm.
And they can be complicated drinks, but they can't be like overcomplicated, you know? And so I think you got to work on that balance. A lot of drinks I've tasted over the last few years were very unbalanced. Either they tasted like dirt, or they tasted like, you know, tisane or potpourri or something, because there were so many herbal and floral essences going on. Or there's like mezcal, amaro, sherry, every trendy ingredient all mixed together, and that tastes like every other drink that has the exact same idea.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of stuff like that. I always like the fashion advice that I believe it was Coco Chanel. I could be wrong here. Said, you know, put everything you're going to wear on, and then take one item off.
Oh,
And
that's a good piece of
yeah,
advice.
yeah, it
That's a good
is.
piece of
I want
advice.
all this stuff, but that's too much, you know. So let me just roll it back a little bit, and then, you know, maybe it'll be okay. So I'm always interested in that.
Do you have your white whale of whether it be a cocktail or a technique or a person that you're still sort of like looking at going, I really want to research you further, but I can't. It's you're a different, like for me, it's Ted Saucier. I've wanted to go
Yeah, yeah,
much more deep on Ted Saucier because he sort of was very, very, very popular. And
yeah, yeah,
then
yeah.
at his funeral, he had like two people show up. Like
Yeah, what happened?
yeah, yeah, and
Well, he
he's
was a
very
press agent, so he was
yeah.
popular as long as he was being a press agent, and once he was done, you know.
Do you have someone? Do you have a person or a cocktail that is your white whale that you still want to sort of like delve further into?
Well, I'm always kind of digging into New Orleans drinks,
Mm.
mostly because I just like reading about New Orleans,
And it's an excuse
and
to go to New Orleans.
yeah, and you know, also just New Orleans in the old days is fascinating. Right now, I'm obsessed with the pink shimmy, uh, which is otherwise known as the Ohen cocktail. And I just bought some academic book on Southern cocktail, on drinking in the South. That most of the articles are absolutely weird academic stuff that nobody will ever read. But there was one history of Ohen in there that was fairly useful. So I'm still researching that. And the Sazerac, I'm always trying to, you know, kind of refine my understanding of that one. The Martini, always, I was able
Mhm.
to push back the written history of the Martini by 1 year, which doesn't sound like much, but it took a long time to do that, to 1881. So right now it predates the Manhattan as far as we go. There's always the race, which is first, the Martini or the Manhattan. And right now the Martini's in the lead, going back to 1881, but
Wow,
in Boston, not in New York. So
interesting.
yeah, very interesting, because Boston had a tradition that it was a Boston drink, and you know, it's possible.
But Boston would definitely been more of a hub at that time in the way of
Oh yeah.
politica and like that sort of thing. Would have been definitely much more a hub than New York would have been.
Well, Boston was even known as the hub.
Mm.
That was its nickname. So you're right, but well, New York was always more just because it was so much bigger.
Mm.
But Boston had its own kind of importance, and it was considered the classy American city, you know. which is kind of funny if you know Boston today can be a pretty rough and tumble place. And but back then it was supposed to be very, full of clubmen and things like that.
Interesting.
And the martini seems to have been a clubmen's drink uh, up there and in New York. So you never know when you'll find something new about this stuff.
That's awesome. What do you see the future of cocktails going? Are we looking at? Me personally, I want to get rid of the minimalist movement. I'm sort of done with king cubes and minimalist glassware with citrus coins. It's kind of
Yeah, yeah,
my
yeah.
like that's my like I don't want another milk punch in a minimalist glass with a king cube. I've been fighting that pretty hard, and I've been very open about it on the
I,
podcast how much
I,
I hate it.
I, I don't like cocktails on the rocks in general. Whatever, even the king cube in particular means you get zero dilution and your cocktail goes, you drink it in 3 sips and then you're like, okay, now I've got this huge ice cube that's going to last for an hour and a half and no booze.
So, what do you see the future of the
uh,
cocktail movement being? If you have a crystal ball.
I think there's going to be a little more 70s, 80s nostalgia,
Mm.
but that's going to run aground on the fact that a lot of those drinks really are bad and really sweet and less fun than they're supposed to be. But I'm hoping we'll go back a little bit to sort of just balanced classic cocktails, no big deal. You go in here and we've got, here's our little house menu of the things that we came up with. Here's a few classics, and we got a nice selection of wines and beers. Drink what you like. That's always I see a little more of that these days, where people are starting to pull back a little bit from the we have the most exclusive cocktail bar on in this part of the country, and what would sir and madam like?
Hmm.
It's more just like, well, we can make you any drink you want. Here's some things we like to make. What can we do for you? That's a little. I think we're starting to see a little more of that, and I'd like to see still more.
It is such a cycle, though. Like
Oh yeah.
I joke now because I have been doing this almost 30 years, and it's this fun cycle of like when I remember when we first started in the cocktail culture, when we're trying to push real cocktails circa like early 2000s, mid 2000s. You're sort of pushing that like, oh no, you want to drink this. You don't want to drink the martini craze,
Right,
or if you're in
right, right,
Australia,
right.
the stick drink phases. And then we sort of rolled it back and we're like, oh no, we want you to drink. Everybody's educated now. We want you to drink classics, but here's our really crazy menu
Yeah,
that
yeah,
you should be trying too. And now we're
yeah.
sort of going all the way back to it. But now everybody wants to drink and go in and have a really good Negroni or a really good martini and that sort of thing. So my goal is always like every drink has to be absolutely perfect all the time.
Yeah, well, that isn't that the goal of bartending? If you're serving the people something, you want to make it the best you can make it. That to me is the ultimate bartender is somebody who does that and also knows a lot of jokes.
You've been not just inspiring to bartenders who want to learn more knowledge, but also to writers. What's your advice to the next generation of cocktail historians and spirit writers out there that are trying to make their niche, not necessarily in clickbait stuff, but like in real, like legitimate sort of circumstances?
Well, I always thought cocktail writing is a branch of comic writing, of not comic book, although let's talk about that in a moment, because I've got a comic book coming out in the fall. Uh,
Nice.
but I've always thought it was a branch of humor writing, and you can add all the serious stuff you want, but never forget that it should be amusing for people to read and not a chore. You can't lecture people at great length that people don't like that. You can lecture them a little bit, but you got to make it funny. You've got to just try to keep it a little bit light if you can. And there are different ways of being amusing on the page, but I would think that's the best thing you can do. and that's your best guarantee to not being replaced by AI.
Drinks history with dad jokes.
Yeah, exactly. Or some kind of jokes in there.
You just mentioned, obviously you can tell I'm a massive comic book fan. I've got framed first edition reproductions on my wall and all that sort of thing from Marvel and DC. Please tell me about this comic book you've got coming out in fall.
Okay, it's called The Comic Book History of the Cocktail. It's full...
I'm getting goosebumps.
Oh, awesome! It's full color, 400-year history of the cocktail, told in comic book style. We've got a really good Dean Kotz, the illustrator, is a really good, like, classic comic book illustrator, like superhero comic illustrator. The man can draw and is smart and knows how to frame a picture, and it really I'm really proud of it. I think it came out really well. I can't wait till people can see it. It's out on
incredible.
September 23rd from 10 Speed Graphics. So
awesome. That's I'm literally, I got goosebumps when you told me about that. I need that. I love graphic novels and that sort of thing. I think that we need more of that. I've got Anthony Bourdain's graphic novel when he did his.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And
yeah.
like I just have an affinity for that sort of medium that resonates with my absorption, I suppose, of stuff. Like, yeah.
I always liked maybe less superhero comics and always stuff like Tintin and things like that.
Yep. Asterix and Obelix.
Yeah, I like those things.
Yeah.
And then when I got asked to do this, I thought, hey, this is going to be fun and easy, and it was not easy. It turns out it was really hard. But I had to think about a lot of stuff that I'd kind of skipped over, because I had to tell like a somewhat detailed, connected history of the cocktail all the way to the beginning, and try to make it global and include the people who really were there, who have been written out of the history since. And there's a lot of stuff like that. So it was complicated, and there was a bunch of research involved. But I think it came out pretty well, and I hope people enjoy it. It's an interesting project.
That's cool. So what's one historical drink you think deserves a serious comeback, and one modern trend you wish would disappear? Well, we talked about the modern trend that can disappear.
Yeah,
but what's the one historical drink you think can make a serious comeback?
Well, I'm very fond of the pink shimmy these days, which I just mentioned.
What is in the pink shimmy?
Okay, the pink shimmy, it was the nickname they gave in New Orleans to the Ohen cocktail, which is Spanish anisette, shaken up with sugar if it's a dry anisette, or you could just use a sweet one. Shaken up with that and a few healthy dashes of Peychaud's bitters, maybe a little bit of water. Done, and it's pink. You have to like the flavor of anise, but it's very refreshing and very cool. That's a very fun drink. And it looks cool, it tastes great, and it's got a cool history, and I don't know. I'm very fond of that one these days. It's a good summer drink.
That's very cool. So it's very similar to like a pre sort of absinthe prohibition take on the different ways that people were presenting absinthe back in the day.
Exactly.
Whether it be crushed ice, couple of dashes of maraschino, mint, that sort of thing. Yeah, that's very cool.
Very simple drink, and during Prohibition, the company that had imported the Ohen, which was a particular Spanish brand of anisette, they made a non-alcoholic version that I found in New Orleans newspapers from the time, account after account of raids on bars and on speakeasies, etc., where they were always finding gallons of pink shimmy, because the people bought that non-alcoholic thing and immediately mixed it with grain alcohol. And just kept it on hand. So that was what people were really drinking during Prohibition in New Orleans. They were drinking
fantastic.
pink shimmies like mad.
Is there a Spanish anisette that gets brought into the US?
There are a couple. There is Ohen got revived by the Sazerac company.
Oh wow!
Because they had imported it after Prohibition. But there's also Anis del Mono I like very much. I think that's the best one. They have a nice dry one. You can also do like the Sicilian style. You use a very strong anisette, a strong dry one, and you pour it on top of a glass of ice water and let it cloud up. And that's very refreshing on a hot summer day, which, as we're all going to be living through for the rest of our lives. Thank you, fossil fuel industry. Um, so, stock up on summer drinks, I would say.
So we're halfway through the year. What's the plan for the outside of the comic book and everything? What are the big milestones coming up in the next 6 months?
I've got some travel coming. I've got vacation in France, so that's always nice.
That's always nice.
I'm showing up at Tales of the Cocktail. I've got my book launch in September. I'm going to come out to at least San Francisco and probably points north. I don't know if I'll make it as far as Vancouver. I would love to, but in November to promote the book. And then I'll be back. I have an apartment in Italy, and I've been spending time there because my dad was from there, and I have, family connection, and I've been going there my whole life. And it's a nice place and relaxing these days, which I can't say as much for America. Kind of a madhouse here.
So we're at the stage of the podcast where I always ask 5 deep podcast questions at the very end of the podcast to get my guests' reactions. What is one lesson or experience that has shaped your perspective the most, and how do you carry that forward in your life?
I think, weirdly, I would have to give pride of place to what I learned when I was an academic. Before I was an English professor, I got a PhD in comparative literature, which was an insane amount of work and took many years. But I learned chase down every rabbit, Every time you turn up some stray fact, don't just say, well, I'll get that another time. Make sure you go back and do that. Chase out every stray fact needs to be checked. It needs to be researched. You need to push it as far as you can go. You might not get to the bottom of it, but at least get as far as you can go. And that, I think, is the best lesson. It's basically just be thorough. And you never know what you're going to find. And that's when you find the most interesting stuff, is when you're looking for something else. So I would say that was my my best lesson on, at least professionally.
If you could leave one lasting message or piece of wisdom for the world, what would it be and why?
I like mine up, dry and not too dry, and with a twist, please.
Looking back on your journey, what is something you wish you had understood earlier in life?
Let me think about that for a second. Well, I would say I wish I had understood the importance of camaraderie in life, of having your crew, your team, of being friendly. And I learned a lot about that from bartending and from, bartenders. I mean, I was never a professional bartender, but I've worked enough bar shifts as a celebrity bartender, and eventually I learned how to use the point of sale machine and all that kind of stuff. So, I have done some bartending, and I learned the importance of that. But I would say I learned it entirely from this industry. But I was a musician before I was an English professor, and I learned a bunch about the importance of that there too.
How do you define success, and has your definition of it changed over time?
I define success personally as nobody can tell me what to do, and that has never changed my whole life.
That's a good one. I'm trying to adapt that to myself right now.
You can ask me, but you can't tell me.
Oh, that's a good one. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
What do you hope your legacy will be, and what steps are you taking to build it?
Well, I try to mentor as many people as possible. I've got lots of friends in the industry, and I try to mentor people for all kinds of reasons, but mostly just because I think I want to see people get ahead, and I think it's a cool industry, and it's a great, old, and interesting and honorable craft. And I want to see people succeed in it. So I hope that's where my legacy will lie, is in the people I've, shared stuff with and helped get a leg up with.
David, thank you so much for your time, man. It's always I say this very often. And obviously, coming from Australia, I moved here when I was 26. Got my first copy of Imbibe around that time too, and I again, coming from the pre-internet days, like, you had to buy cocktail books, you had to have that tangible piece of thing in your hand. You couldn't just go to your supercomputer in your pocket. And I'm still that 26-year-old Australian kid who is fortunate enough to like have sat down with you, been to your seminars, done drink tastings with you, had drinks from you. And it's still even this day, when I'm going on my mid 40s now, is I still get giddy when I get an opportunity to sit down with people like yourself.
Well, God bless you. God bless you for doing this. Thanks for having me on. And, I'm always happiest when I'm hanging out with you and people like you. So, it's like I said, it's a friendly industry, isn't it? And we have fun.
Well, I appreciate your time, my friend. Thank you so much for your time. I absolutely adored it. So thanks so much for your time.
Well, thank you.
I'll chat to you very soon, sir. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening, Pose Shifters. I hope you enjoyed that episode. I really enjoy sitting down with friends and peers and just chatting about the industry and getting down to the nuts and bolts of what's really going on out there. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, everything on all the platforms. Just hit it up and I'll do my best to answer any queries or questions you have. I'll see you next week, guys. Bye.